Cheaters.
Call the meeting to order, and we will start with the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Brad should be reminded.
Brad is.
Okay, because I can't. No. Okay, and John is it?
And Lee.
Okay. So we
She's not
got,
on the board,
we've got,
so I don't report about her. I know she's there. I can see her, but I can't read her name. That's
next item
one thing I
is,
can't, I know, but I can't.
next item is the minutes. They were distributed with, the attachments. If, I'll take a, motion for their approval.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any, additions, deletions, changes people wish to be made? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Public comment, nobody in the room, nobody online. So we'll,
Mr. Chairman, before you move on.
Yep.
So I have another meeting in the building downstairs at 7.
we'll be done.
Oh, yeah. So it may be in the middle of this presentation. And I don't know that I'll be back much before you are going to be finished.
Okay, do you want to jump in and do your select?
Well, I mean, I can cover a couple things super quick. We were not gonna do much with the budget tonight. March 4th is the public hearing. I don't think anything that, we did was dramatic over than what you heard, during the meetings. There might have been a couple tweaks, that we voted on. But you guys have been in on the ground floor. That's the whole point. March 4th will be the public hearing. We'll go from there. Celebrate Saybrook, our party, June 23rd, is well underway. We're locking down insurance, we're locking down bathrooms, advertising, bands. It takes a lot of time to plan it. We're moving along pretty well.
Are you the alcohol permittee?
I will be the alcohol permittee again, yep.
We'll be able to open a bar when you.
So we begin negotiations. We have 2 sets of negotiations, union negotiations that will expire for June 30th this year. Police, which we are scheduled to meet on February 27th. We do have several members of the police commission. I think one too many, to be honest, that want to participate or at least sit in on them. If anybody from the Board of Finance would like to observe and when we caucus, comment, you're more than welcome to. You can run that through the chairman. We do have to technically announce our team at the first set of meetings, or the first meeting, when we do our ground rules. So think about that.
What time of day are you?
Yeah, when will it typically take place?
I'm sorry?
When do they typically take place? You're saying?
Well, we're meeting with the police February 27th.
What time of day?
Well, right now we're scheduled for 10. Unfortunately, I have a Mira Dissolution Authority Board of Directors meeting that will go from 9:30 to 11:30. We're gonna see if we can move them. If not, it's not the end of the world. We'll still start at 10. A lot of it, the first meeting is ground rules. There might be an exchange of proposals. There might not be, depending on whether they have an exchange. We've prepared our first exchange. What usually will happen is we'll exchange. The parties will review each other's exchanges to make sure we're clear on what the other party is asking for, and then we'll break and caucus. It can be an hour meeting. If we think we're making progress, it could be 3 hours and we come to an agreement. Unlikely, at least with the first meeting. So even my meeting from 9:30 to 11:30, if we have to keep it at 10, the start of the negotiations, won't be so bad because we have a lawyer, Pat McHale, who typically will handle those any decisions are made in caucus anyway. So, but my meeting is something I have to participate in. So that's the answer to your question. It's probably the 27th at 9:30 or 10 rather. The support union, we don't have a date yet. So, I can let you know when we do get a date.
Carl,
Yes.
I know you're trying to get through it quickly,
No.
but just, if one cannot just come in and out of the negotiation, so if one chooses to be an observer, you're pretty much committing to observe the whole thing, or?
No, if you're not there every meeting, it's not a big deal.
Okay.
Not at all. Not everybody will make every meeting.
Got it, okay.
So we learned something with Fine Fettle, the cannabis retail outlet. I learned how we get paid. So we estimate payments will be 100 to 150,000 a year. And that is simply with orders and deliveries and not with walk-ins. Obviously, with walk-ins, it would be significantly higher. I
They
think
do walk-ins.
they
They're not
don't,
allowed to
right,
do walk-ins.
but I think we can all agree, based on my observation, is that it's a non-factor from a traffic perspective. I've driven by there a lot. Maybe I'm missing the busy times, but anyway, this is the way it works. They submit their gross sales to, I assume, the Department of Revenue Services. We get notified of how much they sold that month. It's gross, off the gross sales. DRS notifies us, hey, they sold $50,000 worth of cannabis. Your 3% is X number of dollars, and we direct bill Fine Fettle. And then they send us a check. Interesting, you know, doesn't, so the good news is, in a way, it doesn't come from the state.
Right.
They don't sequester the funds and then come back to us. So anyway.
Is that built into this year's budget?
So no, because that money has to be used exclusively for certain things statutorily. 6 purposes. Most of them are education, treatment, things like that. But there is one that talks about improvements in the area where the cannabis location is. And of course, we have this Mariners Way project going on right now that may need funding. So that may be a good source of funding to jumpstart that project or hire a consultant for that project or do some construction with that project or do some planning with that project. Those funds could be very useful towards the Mariners Way project because that is an allowable use. I'm assuming it's an allowable use statutorily because maybe towns that were allowing cannabis locations in didn't want them in certain areas of town, and maybe they put them in an area of town or an underserved area of town. And therefore, the legislature determined that, hey, it would be good if they can also invest in that area of town. That's an assumption on my part. Anyway, that was just a kind of a tell you how we get paid and what the estimated numbers are going to be. Those numbers will be segregated, kept in an off-budget account, and you'll see those monthly. I sat in on an Inflation Reduction Act direct pay. Not a seminar, we arranged it through the COG. George and I mean, you don't mind me saying, George brought up, all our schools have to be air conditioned at some point. We're obviously awaiting a grant. The next project is at the middle school. George brought up geothermal, and the direct pay is interesting because typically the IRA is set up for a company to take a tax deduction or get a tax refund, the Inflation Reduction Act, if you do an energy project. For nonprofits or for a municipality where we don't pay taxes, there's a direct pay formula. So in other words, we might get 30% of the project direct pay to us. So we might, if a project is a $3 million project and we install a system, whether it's geothermal or something else that qualifies, solar, we would install And in the year of, completion, we would then seek direct pay back and get that 30%. And by the way, the money ain't running out. I mean, they estimate the funding will be there. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal just the other day, until I think 2033. They estimate these funds will be good till. So it is something we need to look into, in a big way, in my opinion. And I also believe, and it was the belief of, the representative from Courtney's office, that these funds may be able to be utilized in conjunction with grant funding from the state. So if we were to get funding, so could be interesting, could be good money savings for a very expensive project over at the middle school. Looking into it a little bit more. Couple things at the legislature that we're watching. There's a public hearing tomorrow on towns being allowed. This has been a big issue since I've been first selected for 12 years. Towns being allowed to advertise meetings, and other notices on their website and not in a newspaper. You can imagine that there's a lot of towns that spend a lot of money with the New Haven Register, the Hartford Current. But then you get a town like Old Saybrook. I remember the days, sound old here, where we used to pass a budget, and I was chairman of the Board of Finance, and the newspaper people were calling me for a quote. That's not happening anymore. The Register doesn't cover us. They used to. I remember the lady from the New Haven reporter from the Register being in our campaign headquarters. That hasn't happened in 6-8 years. The Day used to cover us a little bit, and the Current used to have an office in town. Many of you may remember that. So really, when you're putting an ad in a paper, who are you reaching anymore? And so there's been a big push by municipalities, CCM and the Council of Small Towns, to get this so that we can advertise on our websites, because with push notifications, we're reaching far more people than the newspaper. I mean, there must be at least 2,000 to 4,000. I don't know if everybody signed up for that, but I get my own notices when I put out a press release or something. So that is a hearing tomorrow. I submitted some testimony on it. Just thought that's one of the bills that is being raised. There's another bill that's being raised with my cynicism of state legislators is that they love to pass laws that make them look good, that hurt the town budget, but it sounds great. So like, they want to give a $500 tax credit to first-time homeowners. Terrific, helps a young family. That there is a very specific provision though. They have to be getting a loan from the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, but you can imagine how that would spread. And that's that's $500 that we are not going to see locally times however many homes. Now, it may not be a big number, but every year they do something. One year they doubled the firefighter tax abatement credit. So it went from 60,000 to 120,000 in our budget. It's a great thing. Awesome. We keep more firefighters, but it's rare that they give an income tax credit. It's rare that they will dent the state finances. They do a lot of stuff that works locally. And another one is tax leniency. If the tax collector makes an error in putting out his tax bill, his or her tax bill, with vehicles, personal property, or cars or houses, the taxpayer can make a claim that they didn't get notice. Whereas before, ignorance was not bliss. You knew you had to pay your taxes in July, January. Now there may be an argument for you to ask for a waiver of the 18% interest in any other lien fee. So that's also out there right now, which, so, I mean, I'm not saying it's bad, but, anyway. And lastly, I am, hard at work, unfortunately, on, the waste crisis in the state of Connecticut. both sitting on the Mirror Dissolution Authority, and I sit on a task force through CCM to make some recommendations. When you guys have a lot more time, I'm happy to talk to you a lot more about that, but I spend a lot of time, probably way more than I want to. But the reason I sit on the Mirror Dissolution Authority is to protect our town's interest, because it's mostly a Hartford-centric board. And there's a lot of money up there that they want to basically sweep for remediation of the Mira South Meadows plant. That was a coal burning plant before Mira took it over to burn trash. So there's pollution there. There is a problem there. I'm not saying there's not pollution, but there is money that should be coming to the town of Old Saybrook and 23 other towns from Mira, when Mira was Mira and not Mira Dissolution Authority. And I want those contracts honored through 2027, June of 27. And there's a lot of talk of them breaking the contracts, which would send the price per ton of garbage most likely higher. But let's get into that another meeting, because there's some other state interests in keeping towns together. For instance, Mira serves in Essex, Mira serves, the transfer station there serves about 13 towns. And then there's one in Torrington that serves about another 12 towns. And there's an interest in keeping people together, because if you want any sort of new plant built in the state of Connecticut, whether it's a new burn plant, and then there are these new technology plants that are supposedly coming, those plants are going to want a guarantee of tonnage coming to them. So if I sign a 5-year contract now and I get a lower price, and so-and-so hauler wants to ship my garbage out of state, but he's willing to give me a good price, I'm tied up for 5 years. And if there's new technology out there and they want to bring a bunch of towns together, they need a guaranteed tonnage to open that plant. And that is the state's policy right now, is to try to keep as much tonnage in Connecticut so that we can develop these technologies. But folks at the MDA, in my opinion, looking to break these contracts are going to cause a dispersion of towns, and that's not good for the long-term policy of the state. So those are just some of the things that are going on that I thought I'd bring to your attention. And I know Mike is here from our auditors. Any questions on anything else that's going on? There's a lot going on in town.
What's the final report from Mariners Way, the consultants? Do we know when that's?
Ask your chairman. There is no, probably March, April. We're making good progress on it. by the way.
I'd say March.
We have some very good ideas moving forward. And I think we've made really good headway, really good progress. And I think when the final report comes in, we will have a next step. We will have an implementation phase. Nothing happens overnight, but I think we will have a path forward to try to make some changes out there, truly. And I thank Bruce and Matt and Chris Costa and Jennifer Donahue for assisting with that. A lot of time has gone into that, So.
Any other questions for Carl? Thank you, thank you. So we will go back to the agenda and hear from the auditor from Mahoney Savol, Michael Van de Venter. How's that, too close?
Yeah, it's Van Deventer, but I'll take it.
All right, and thank you for joining us tonight. And I know you've got a slide presentation. Are we set up to be able to see the slides?
Yeah, let me just make sure I can share my screen here.
And Michael, do you prefer Mike or Michael?
Mike is fine.
All right, thank you.
And can you see the screen, the presentation?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes.
All right. Carl, very good information that you just discussed. There is a lot of available funds, as you said, under the Inflation Reduction Act. So happy to talk about that with you as well at some other time. But you're right. There is a lot of money, and there's a lot of compliance associated with it as well. So you definitely have to prepare if you're going to plan on using those funds.
Great, thank you.
Yep. All right. Now, for the reason I'm here, I'm happy to present the audit results for the town's fiscal year 2023 audit. Everyone should have received a copy of the financial statements as well as the federal and state single audit reports. Again, I do not go through those in detail. There's a lot of good information in there. Certainly encourage you as board members to review that information. My presentation will really provide an overall summary of the work that was performed and the reports that were issued. In terms of the scope of work, again, we did perform an audit of the town's financial statements. We performed that audit in accordance with both the auditing standards issued by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, as well as the government auditing standards issued by the Government Accountability Office. In addition, based on the level of federal and state funding that the town did receive and expend, we did perform both federal and state single audits. We also perform an agreed upon procedures on the end of school year reports that are filed by the school district with the State of Connecticut Department of Education. In addition to those attest services, we also perform some non-audit work as well. So we do assist in the preparation of the town's financial statements, the schedule of expenditures of federal awards and state financial assistance, and the related notes. We also assist in converting the town's governmental fund financial statements to the government-wide financial statements. In order for the firm to be able to perform these services and remain independent of the town, management is required to oversee and ultimately accept responsibility for those services. And again, Leanne, in the role of the finance director, has accepted responsibility for those services, and therefore we remain independent of the town. In connection with our work, we do issue a number of reports. In regards to the report on the financial statements, we did issue unmodified clean opinions on the town's financial statements. Again, an unmodified opinion is expressed when we've concluded that the financial statements have been prepared in all material respects in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America, and that is as established by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. I do like to point out that our opinion does provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from a material misstatement, whether due to error or fraud. Again, if you read our opinion, we do not provide absolute assurance. We do utilize sampling in our audit methodology. The financial statements do include some significant estimates, and therefore we cannot provide absolute assurance. But again, reasonable assurance is still a very high level of assurance. In addition to the report on the financial statements, we also issue a report on compliance and on internal control over financial reporting. In this report, we do not actually express an opinion on the town's compliance with laws and regulations or on the effectiveness of the town's internal controls. Essentially, during the course of performing our audit, if we become aware of material non-compliance of a law or regulation, or what we would consider to be a significant deficiency or material weakness over financial reporting, we are required by our standards to include it in this report. And again, we did not report any such matters. In connection with the federal single audit, we issue a report on compliance at the federal award level. In this report, we do actually express an opinion on your compliance with your major federal programs. For fiscal year 2023, the total federal awards that were expended by the town was approximately $2 million. Your major program was the Education Stabilization Funds. We did issue unmodified clean opinions on compliance over that program. And again, we don't report any deficiencies over grant compliance. We issue a similar report in connection with the state single audit. For fiscal year 2023, the total state financial assistance that was received and expended by the town totaled approximately $1.2 million. The portion that was considered non-exempt, or $975,000, was subject to the single audit procedures. Your major programs were the Town Aid Road Grant Funds, the Let's Go Connecticut Transportation Ramp-Up Program, and then the tiered payment in lieu of taxes. Again, we did issue unmodified clean opinions on compliance over those programs. and we did not report any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses over grant compliance. So from a reporting perspective, our reports were clean. This next section goes over our financial highlights. And again, there's a lot of financial information that's included in the financial statements. Certainly, if we identified any concerns from a financial perspective, I would include it in these slides. The first item here, the first slide goes over your general fund budgetary highlights. Again, your original budget did not provide for the use of fund balance to balance revenues and expenditures. Your final budget included additional appropriations of $30,000. Your actual budgetary surplus was approximately $3.6 million, of which $3.2 million was subsequently transferred to other funds for authorized purposes. This resulted in an overall favorable budgetary variance for the general fund of about $347,000 and a net change in fund balance of approximately $317,000. In terms of your budgetary surplus, it was really driven by revenues, which came in about 2.8 million more than budgeted. And again, you did have favorable collections on property taxes, state grants, building permits, and interest income. And then overall expenditures were about $792,000 less than budgeted. Again, no instances of budgetary noncompliance were identified during the audit. Next slide goes over your governmental fund financial highlights. So this includes your general fund on a GAAP basis, as well as all of your special revenue and capital project funds. Your combined ending fund balance totaled approximately $21.7 million. That was an increase of about $3.1 million from the prior year, really driven by the overall budgetary surplus. Of the $21.7 million, approximately $9 million is included in your general fund. That was an increase of about $259,000 from the prior year. The portion that is considered unassigned is approximately $8.5 million, and that represents about 17% or 2 months of your fiscal year 2024 budgetary expenditure appropriations. Your capital projects fund had an ending fund balance of about $4.7 million, an increase of about $1.7 million from the prior year. Again, those authorized transfers in from the general fund. Your capital non-recurring funds had an ending fund balance of about $5.2 million. That was an increase of about $1.1 million from the prior year, also generated primarily by the transfers in from the general fund. And then all of your other funds had an ending fund balance of about $2.7 million, an increase of about $98,000 from the prior year. And again, no fund deficits were reported in the audit. Next slide goes over your government-wide financial highlights. The government-wide financial statements are prepared on a full accrual basis of accounting. It captures your capital assets as well as all of your long-term liabilities. From a user perspective, the focus on the government-wide financial statements are on your long-term liabilities. In terms of your net pension liabilities, the town's net pension liability totaled about $6.3 million. That was a decrease of about $772,000 from the prior year. That was really driven by current year market gains on plan assets. That plan is currently approximately 80% funded. The net pension for liability for the fire company plan was about $1.4 million. Again, a decrease of about $59,000 driven by the current year market gains on plan assets. And that plan is currently about 55% funded. When you look at your net pension liabilities, again, the focus is on the actuarial assumptions that are being utilized to determine your annual required contributions and then making those contributions on an annual basis. If you follow that, you should have sufficient funds to cover the benefit payments as they come due. The town does report another post-employment benefit liability that reflects retiree healthcare benefits for eligible employees. That is currently funded by the town on a pay-as-you-go basis. The actuarially determined liability for those benefits totaled approximately $8.3 million. That was a decrease of about $871,000 from the prior year. That decrease does reflect an increase in the overall discount rate that was utilized to determine the total OPEB liability. And then this last section goes over our required communications, and we do issue a separate report which does include these communications in a letter. Again, these communications are really geared towards when the auditor runs into significant issues during the course of the audit. Again, we had no significant issues during the course of performing the audit, so these communications are somewhat brief. The first item here talks about our responsibility under our auditing standards. Although we do assist in the preparation of the financial statements, they are the responsibility of management. All of the information did come from the town. Again, it's our responsibility to perform our audit procedures and express our opinion on those financial statements. In terms of the plan, scope, and timing of the audit, again, no changes in the overall scope of work that was originally agreed upon, and the audit was performed on the agreed upon timeline. We did file for one extension, and that was really just to wrap up the reporting around the end of the year holidays. And again, the financial statements were filed during the first week of January. In terms of significant audit findings, again, we do review the accounting policies and practices of the town. Here we usually point out if there were new accounting standards that had a significant impact on the financial statements. Again, there were no new accounting standards that were implemented that had a significant effect on the town's financial statements. As I mentioned before, the financial statements do include some significant estimates and judgments. Those consist of estimated useful lives assigned to capital assets and then discount rates utilized to determine your net pension and OPEB liabilities. Again, we did review those estimates. We did deem them to be reasonable and consistent with what other governments utilize. Again, happy to report there were no significant difficulties encountered in performing the audit. We had no uncorrected misstatements. So again, if we identified an adjustment and we proposed it to management and they did not want to report it, we would be required to communicate that to you. We had no disagreements with management. We did obtain a management representation letter. Again, no unusual representations were requested by us from management. Again, I just give the example. If we were testing a transaction and we were unable to substantiate that transaction and we were relying on the representation of management, we would communicate that to you as the board. And again, we're not aware of any consultations by management with any other independent accountants. So again, that's really an overview of the results of the audit and the reports that were issued. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it. Questions that folks have? I'll kick them off. So first question I have is scope. Is this only the general government side of things, or does this audit include the Board of Education as well? And I ask that question because of your review of the federal grants, reviewed the some education grants.
Yep. So this includes all town departments, including the Board of Education.
Okay. Thank you very much. And then secondly, happen to also be the chair of our ARPA committee. And is there any specific, separate, distinct audit that you guys are required to do under ARPA in order to make sure that we remain in compliance there?
So the ARPA funds do fall under the total federal awards that are subject to the compliance audit. So again, we follow the federal single audit requirements to determine which funds are required to be tested on an annual basis. So again, this year was the education stabilization funds. So again, I think, Leanne, I can't remember, but I think we tested some ARPA funds last year. But I'd have to go look. Other than that, again, it's subject to the general financial statement audit. Unless we provide a specific opinion on that program, we're not testing additional compliance requirements for that grant.
And I'd just like to add, if I may, Mr. Chair, on the ARPA, that they did test them last year. And when ARPA was launched, I'm sure you recall, because you and I had a conversation about this, about all of the information upfront that we needed to do to make sure that as we lent, or not lent, but just appropriated money for ARPA, that we were doing it with proper compliance. And Mahoney Sable did give us a lot of the background information and examples and made sure that our controls were appropriate.
Great. And so that will, similar to what you did with the education stabilization, that might cycle up in another year or 2 or 3 years as being something that you'll take a look at again. Is that right?
Correct. Although the ARPA funds, I think that timeline is ending in 2025, fiscal year 2025. So,
well, the expenditures go through December of 26. So that would be
liquidation.
fiscal 27.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Other questions here? Anybody? George?
Yeah, I have a quick question. And so this is, in your review of our, of finances, do you look at our ability to fund major projects down the road? And I'm specifically thinking about the WPCA, project that we need to be facing within the next few years. And from your opinion, I mean, does your review basically take a look at whether we are in a good situation to basically manage that, in a few years?
Right, so that would be, I mean, that's really a management question, and a potential consultant. It doesn't really fall under the scope of the financial statement audit per se.
Understood. Thank you.
Brad, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. I'm all set. Thank you.
Two more for me. One is on the, one of the things that I believe we've approved is, going into a negative balance, for the purchase of, capital assets. I think we're going into with an off-budget account for the DPW trucks, and then we'll be over the next 4 or 5 years filling that up. One of your statements right toward the end of your slides was that there are no negative balances. Would that be the kind of negative balance that you would identify and report on next, or for your audit of this current fiscal year?
Leanne, could you
So,
clarify funding?
what they're speaking of is in our municipal reserve fund, we have capital non-recurring, we have a fund for fire apparatus and a fund for Department of Public Works apparatus. So we look at those individually. And what we are planning on doing is purchasing some vehicles, and instead of taking the money directly out of capital non-recurring, you know, just from a funding perspective, we have 3 separate funds. One will go negative for a while until we put yearly deposits in. Oh, my God. Sorry. So yes, so and we do have negative balances in other funds. So these, I'm talking about the off-budget funds. For example, if we have a grant that's reimbursable, the fund goes negative, and then we top it off when we submit the receipts. So the question is, do you have a problem with us from a financial perspective, purchasing equipment, borrowing from ourselves, and paying it back over the course of a year or 2 or 3?
No, not at all. So that's an internal financing mechanism. Many municipalities do utilize that mechanism. There'll just be some additional disclosures surrounding the nature of the deficit and what caused it and what your plan is for funding it. So it's not as if it's a unfunded deficit.
Got it. Okay, thanks. And my last question is actually, I think, one for Leanne. In the book, that you had handed out on page 11, there's a discussion of the Economic Development Fund. Is that the TIP fund?
Page 11 of his presentation.
Page 11 of the actual financial statements, the larger book that we got a few weeks ago.
This one?
Yeah, yes.
Let me just get to page 11.
So Leanne, that includes some of your related grants. I believe the ARPA funds are also recorded in that fund as well.
Okay, so Economic Development Fund has a balance of 161,000 as of June 30, 2023, an increase of the fund of 82,000. And is that your question, if the ARPA funds are included in that fund?
No, my question was, is that the tax increment finance fund?
No, that is, well, the tax incremental financing fund is included in the economic development funds. But that's not what the increase is specifically. I'd have to look at the details.
Right. There's a number of funds that are consolidated into that one fund for financial reporting purposes.
Okay, so when you have a chance, Leanne, if you could just send me what the collection of funds are, that would be helpful.
Yes, I will. And just, okay, yes, I will.
Okay, any other questions? Hearing none, Mike, thanks very much, appreciate it. Just a curiosity, given the world of Zoom and things, is this your life these days, attending Board of Finance meetings virtually around the state, or how is that going?
If it's allowed and permitted, yes, it is very convenient. Again, we have a large governmental practice. So we do over 20 municipalities. And so I have a number of board meetings, probably 2 to 3 a week, throughout January and February. Again, I'm happy to do this. Certainly if we had significant audit issues, I would probably say, hey, I should be in attendance at the meeting. But again, your audit was clean, really no significant issues to discuss. So I'm happy to do it remotely if you're happy with that.
All right, thank you, appreciate it, and you can continue it with your evening, and we'll move on.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
We're up to the treasurer's report. Madam Treasurer?
Okey dokey. I have not too long of a report myself. All right, so we will start with our executive summary. So fiscal year to date, the town has received revenue of $48,884,659, or 97.2% of the total amount of our $50,276,744 budgeted for fiscal year 24. A lot of our taxes have been paid. When comparing our performance to last fiscal year, we are 0.7% behind from this time last year. We'll move down to our authorized investment section on your first section of your sheet there. At the end of January, the town had 42 million in its bank accounts. In the last month, the stiff rate stayed steady at 5.58, and today its rate is 5.43. And Webster gives us our stiff rate in arrears, so their rate last month was 5.57. As you can see, all our interest rates on our accounts are moving up slightly, and that's very good news for us. On January 31st, we had a $2,082,728,000 bond mature. And so on February 1st, we purchased a 10-month bond for our fiscal year 25 interest scheme that we're doing. That will mature in November of 2024, which will, I feel like I had something fall on me. I'm sorry. Out of the ceiling. Ah, gross. Which will mature, which will give us a maturity interest of $75,334, which will give us a value of $2,150,000. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay. Then we'll move down to the pension plan. At the end of January, we received our report from Morgan Stanley, the town's investment manager. The town pension plan is up 5.42% fiscal year to date versus its benchmark of 6.03%. Over the 3-year horizon, the town plan has returned 2.11% versus its benchmark of 3.34%. The fire department pension plan is up 5.40% fiscal year to date and has returned 2.35% over the 3-year horizon versus its benchmark of 3.34%. At our last pension meeting, our investment advisor told us that our projected income for the town pension for the upcoming 12 months is $693,000. The pension board is always reviewing on a monthly basis the entire pension portfolio and is always discussing and tweaking with its advisors the portfolio.
How does that 693 relate to, say, the previous 12 months? Do you know?
I don't know. Leanne, do you know how that 693 related to the previous 12 months? I don't remember.
So I don't have the exact number in front of me, but I will say this, with the short-term rates being higher than they have been in the past, the cash flow that Barbara's reporting on is really key in terms of the management of our pension plan because it's beginning to cover a larger and larger portion. It doesn't cover 100% of our pension payroll, but it obviously allows us to not have to dig into the core of our portfolio and having these cash flows available. But I would say doubles, over the past several years, we've seen like a doubling. I mean, it's been significant, a very significant move. And if you would like to know, year over year, it's probably very similar, maybe I'm sure it's higher, but very similar because rates were higher last year. But if we were to look back like 2 or 3 years ago, we'd see a significant increase.
Yeah, we're meeting on Thursday. I can ask him to project back and give that to me.
And just so there's
So
some
we can
context
have
for that
that
number.
for context. That's a good question, Bruce. Because we've diversified that portfolio to go more into some bonds.
Mhm.
We've definitely done that. But we've got some, great stocks too that are, paying dividends.
Excuse me, thank you.
It's a great board that takes so much time and interest. And the advisors, they come here and it's a great board. You would agree, Leah. It's a great board. Everybody is very concerned. Everybody does a great job. We don't make big movements, but strong and steady and
Trend.
doing very well. Yeah, it's really doing great. Okay, so overall, the treasurer's responsibility is to oversee all the monies belonging to the town. So as of January 31st, our total cash balances were $42 million. Total pension balances were $28.4 million for total assets under management of $70.4 million. So page 2 of the treasurer's report breaks down the revenues in more detail. Tax revenues were $15,074,655 for the month, bringing the fiscal year-to-date total to $46,655,431, or 96.8% for the amount budgeted for fiscal year 24. We're very happy that lots of people came in January and paid their taxes. In terms of local revenues, the town collected $15,456,450 million in local revenues, or 97.2% of our fiscal year 24 budget. We collected $93,000 of interest income from Webster Bank and the STIP accounts, and $28,000 from dividend income from a maturity in the cash account. 5 of our local revenue line items have exceeded their budget amounts for fiscal year 24 already at the end of January, which is very good news. And that's all I have.
So, question I would have,
Yes.
if I'm reading this correctly, is that in the local taxes, the property taxes, although we've collected about $926,000 more this year than last year. Then, however, we are about 1% behind in collections. And do you know whether the trend is that we'll catch up to last year and therefore that 926 would grow?
Well, if you remember, as I reported last month, we had that one-time collection last year.
Well,
So
no,
we're
this, I
never
think-
gonna catch up.
I think this is just directly in the, oh, okay.
May
We
I
had
make
that
a comment,
budget,
Mr.
yeah.
Chairman? So we're $926,000 ahead of where we were last year, yet our percentages, on a percentage basis, it shows that we're less than we were last year. And that's because our budget increased by about 1.4 million. So we are going to collect more taxes than we did last year, no matter what, when all is said and done. Is that the question that you were asking?
Well, I guess I'm asking a point in time question, whether or not, given where we are now in February, and we're running at 96.8%, whether or not we believe we will collect at the same percentage rate that we collected last year.
I believe that we will, and actually I'm going to discuss that when it's my turn with a little more color on some other things. If we could wait one
Okay.
moment.
Got it. Any other questions for the treasurer? Seeing none?
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Appreciate it. Leanne, you're up.
All right. Good evening again, everyone. I want to make sure that everyone has their budget book. If not, they're in the office and Jerry knows where they're located so that you all have your copy. It's that time of year again where we start talking, well, at least I start projecting if we're going to have a surplus or not, a revenue surplus for next fiscal year. So our budget is 50,276,000 and our actual to date collected 48,884,000 as the treasurer has just commented on. Between now and the end of the fiscal year, I think that we're going to collect another $3.5 million, which will bring us up to 52.3 million and therefore about a $2 million surplus at this point in time. In terms of taxes, how I project the surplus is I take a look at what we did last year between now and the end of the fiscal year. You know, it's not going to be an exact science, but I'll get clearer and clearer as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year. And last year, in February, we received a lot of delinquent payments for taxes still. So there was about 2.3 million collected during the same period remaining last year of taxes. So yes, I do think that we are going to collect and actually probably outpace our budget for taxes for this fiscal year. The other area, again, this is a similar story to last year. We're going to receive perhaps another $500,000 or $600,000 more in interest income and town clerk fees and park and rec fees that are yet to be collected are all going to contribute towards that. So I think for this fiscal year, we're in pretty good shape in terms of a surplus. And again, I'll report every month to see how we're doing as we approach the end of the fiscal year. So for the finance director's report, so far for the first 7 months of the fiscal year, we have spent 29.1 million of our $50.2 million budget, 57.9% versus 59.7%. So we're a little bit under where we were last year. Turning to page 2 of the report, in terms of new business, the only thing new was the $660,000 for the capital purchase of the DPW trucks that was approved by the Board of Finance and will go to town meeting later on this month. In terms of cash flow, and just to point out, since the auditor was just here, he mentioned how we group a lot of the categories together. And in this report here for cash flows, I group it the same way that the auditors do. General fund, there's actually more than one fund that makes up the general fund. Capital funds, reserve funds, and all other non-major funds. And the economic development funds are at present in the non-major funds. I don't break them out, but I could if you wanted to see what they were like. So general, so for as of the end of January, we had cash flows of a positive $12.1 million. Again, we're collecting money for taxes in July and January. So tax collection plus 15.4 million, and we had expenses for the month of 3.1 million. So that accounted for the movements in the general fund. Capital funds, we used 28.9 million. Those were spent on engineering grant engineering and park and rec programs. The reserve funds actually increased by 16 million. The increase was due to the fact that we have a reserve for early voting, as you know, and we received a grant from the state, and so we put that in there. That increased the amount. We also received interest, and on the municipal reserve fund, and that was also offset by expenses in the reval. So two pluses and one minus accounted for that change. And all the other non-major funds, a reduction of 121,000. And again, that's mainly the outflow of pension fund management cash flows to pay our participants. On page 3, the capital outlays. The only changes that we had from last month was in post-employment payout. That was reduced by $23 million. Every other year, we have to do an actuarial report on our other post-employment benefits. That report is subsequently given to the auditors, and when they talk about the long-term liabilities, that's as a result of the actuarial report. So that costs $23,000. We do it every other year. So we won't have a bill like that until 2 years from now. And again, on the reval account, as I mentioned before, that one declined by about $11,000 as we are continuing to work on the reval for this fiscal year. No other reports on my no other comments on my written report. And I just want to make a comment on the page that has all of the different line items for the general fund budget. If you could go on page 1 all the way kind of down to the bottom, 4 up is Vicky Duffy Pavilion and Parks. On the Vicky Duffy, it's at 95%. So, you know, there's a likelihood that that is going to go over 100%. I like to tell the Board of Finance when I think a line item is going to go over budget. Since it's, you know, the fiscal year isn't over, there's likely that there's going to be more charges. I don't think it's going to reach at all. I don't think it's going to reach the $25,000 limit where we have to do something. But just to remind you all that in fiscal year 25 budget, it was recommended for the Vicky Duffy budget to go up 3,500 to 17,800. So it has been addressed in the fiscal year 25 budget and accounted for the changes. The line item below is already over budget at 104% of budget. But in terms of dollars, it's only like $3,000. You'll see that there's an $8,000 reversal in that line item. Something that was charged for a P&R project for irrigation was charged to the general fund, and we reversed it. But nonetheless, when that's taken out, we're still at 104%. And again, in the fiscal year 25 budget, that other parks, which is all other parks, we increased that by $11,500 to $82,500. So the increased cost has been addressed in the fiscal year 25 budget. And I do not think that this line item either will go over the $25,000 mark. But I just want to point it out. So, and I will keep you all apprised of the situation as we move through the balance of the fiscal year. And I'm going to stop now. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Leanne?
Do you know why the pavilion might go over? Is there additional maintenance because of use and things like that, or, I mean, it's used frequently, right?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. You're talking about why did Vicky Duffy go over?
Pavilion. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you know how much use, I mean, how much use does that get on an annual basis? Do we know?
Yes, we do know. And I believe that it's rented out quite often. And if you want me to get the specifics, I can. Let me just look at, where's the treasurer's report? I think we have the Vicky Duffy in there.
It is.
Yeah, so far we've taken in $8,332. It's already met its budget, and so that translates into use, and we're only, you know, just a hair over half a year. So you know, we'll probably have another like amount by the time we finish the fiscal year. As to how many times it's used, I don't know, but I certainly can get that for you.
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Other questions for Leanne? Hearing none?
Excuse me.
Congratulations. Thank you, Leanne. Appreciate it.
Alrighty.
Moving on, FY budget review. And so I would say this is an opportunity if we have had sat through many of the different, department reviews. And if we have any, questions for Leanne, we have received the budget and, my expectation is that as a board, we'll start, we'll have the budget in our hands officially after the annual budget hearing on March 4th. But if there's questions of clarification that people have that they would like to ask tonight, this would be the time to do that. I guess in that same vein, I know that given the time constraint on the police department's budget at our last meeting, there were a few questions that I had that I did not have a chance to ask at the same time. I know George had some, and so what I would ask is if anybody has a question for any department head, please, rather than everybody going individually to department heads, send them through me. So if it's the same question, I can just ask it once and come back. So if there's any questions, send me the questions. I'll then funnel them to the department head and Leanne so that she knows what's going on, and we'll take it from there. Anything people want to talk about the budget tonight? George?
Just a quick question for the people, since we are the Board of Finance. Board of Finance, page 40, we have a budget of $76,000. What do we do with that money?
We pay for the auditor, which
Auditor is the lion's share of that. I think there's 68,000
so we have that.
listed right in the, let's see if the detail is there. It's for the auditor in any event, it is for the auditor.
That's our primary cost. Okay. All right, then we'll continue on the agenda. We've heard from the selectmen. Do we have any liaison reports? Okay, any comments from board members? We do have 2 members of the public. If you all are interested in speaking, please feel free to raise your hand and we will figure out how to do it.
I can help you if we need to.
All right, seeing no hands raised at this point, we'll continue to move on, and comments from the chair. I only have 2 comments. One is to just reiterate what Carl said at the beginning about the police union negotiations. If any of the board members are interested in participating, feel free to get in touch with him to let him know that. And unfortunately, I was not notified until today that the Board of Finance is invited to attend a land use board meeting, collective meeting, tomorrow night at 6 o'clock in this room to discuss the Mariners Way project. And what is going on there is the Mariners Way consultant, Camoin, has done their economic analysis, has looked at what the market drivers might be for Mariners Way, and is now coming up with a set of strategies. And before those strategies get set in concrete, then they're coming to the land use board. So economic development, planning, zoning, and we, the Board of Finance, are invited to that as well, to hear this set of strategies in draft form, make comment on them, and then the month of March will be used to get everything organized. So it's available through Zoom. So it's actually, if you go into the land use department's website, you will find the agenda with the Zoom on that. And I'm sure being Zoom, it'll also be recorded, and so you can see it at another time if that is more convenient for you. But that's a next major step in the Mariners Way conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, so those are my comments. Is hearing nothing else, seeing nothing else? Not quite 7 o'clock, but I will call for adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
I think I heard you right second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Right.
So I think I located our time.
Stop.